The Subcommittee on Homeland Security will come to order. During today's virtual hearing, members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. When you are recognized to speak, if I notice that you have not muted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. To avoid inadvertent background noise, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participant microphones when they are not recognized to speak. If there's a technology issue during a member's speaking time, we will move to the next member until the issue resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. We will be following the 5-minute rule. With 1 minute remaining in your time, the clock on the screen will turn yellow. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and it will be time to recognize the next member. We will follow the speaking order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, followed by members present at the time the hearing is called to order, in order of seniority, and we will alternate by party. Next, we will go to members who were not present when the hearing was called to order until every member present has had a first round. As a reminder, members can submit information in writing related to the hearing through the email address provided in advance to your staff for that purpose. Now let's begin. I welcome Darby LaJoy, the senior official performing the duties of the administrator at the Transportation Security Administration, who is here to discuss TSA's operations both during the pandemic and as we look forward to moving past it. Members of the public likely interact with TSA and its employees more than any other component of the Department of Homeland Security or any other federal department or agency. This interaction has become much more challenging during the pandemic. While air travelers may not always express their gratitude during the passenger screening process, what TSA and its employees do to protect our nation is greatly appreciated. TSA personnel work on the front lines at great personal risk to ensure the safety of air travel. In fact, 16 TSA personnel have passed away after contracting COVID-19 while performing their duties. Mr. LaJoy, on behalf of the subcommittee, I extend sincere condolences to the families and colleagues of those who have lost their lives. I also reaffirm our continued support and appreciation for your workforce. We look forward to your candid and comprehensive assessment of how COVID has impacted TSA's mission performance and what challenges you foresee for the agency as air travel hopefully begins to return to a more normal pattern. We also want to hear details on the deployment of advanced security technology, workforce pay initiatives, and how you are executing your fiscal year 2021 funding. I know that you are limited in sharing details about TSA's budget requests for the coming year, but I hope we can still have a fulsome conversation about your priorities looking ahead. I would now like to turn to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Fleischman, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. LaJoy, thank you for coming to testify before the Homeland Security Subcommittee today to discuss COVID implications on TSA's budget and operations. I know you've been very busy stepping in for Mr. Piscoke over the last few months, and I would just like to start by saying thank you for all that you have done and all that you're doing, and you're doing an admirable job, sir. Speaking of doing an admirable job, I know I mentioned this to you during our recent discussion, but I just want to say for the record how great the officers have been in the Chattanooga airport. I take pride in being the ranking member of this subcommittee, so I enjoy getting to see firsthand the great work the men and women in Chattanooga are doing and at airports across the country who work valiantly to protect our nation's travelers. So please pass on my many thanks to them. Please also pass on my condolences to the family of TSO Ray Steinmetz, who I learned passed away just last week while performing his duties in the Chattanooga airport. TSA employees are some of the only DHS employees that many Americans come face to face with on a regular basis, and they have represented both you and the department well during these difficult times, maintaining a steadfast approach to keep this country safe despite the challenges that this pandemic has thrust upon them. And they have done so knowing full well the risks that the coronavirus presents. So please pass on my thanks to your entire workforce and my most heartfelt condolences to the families of the 16 TSA employees who have tragically died from contracting COVID-19 while bravely protecting this nation. Despite the pandemic and considering the overwhelming risk, I am pleased with the efforts TSA took to protect both its frontline workforce and the traveling public through the expansion of PPE use, protective barriers, and regular cleaning, as well as leading the charge on reducing the number of touch points and interactions between passengers and TSA screeners. The expansion of the Credential Authorization Technology, CAT, and computed tomography program that came from additional funds in the fiscal 2021 appropriation was almost persistent in these challenging times, and I am excited to see both of these programs work to improve towards a more countless security environment. Thank you, Mr. LaJoy, and I look forward to today's discussion on how we can better support TSA through COVID and beyond. Madam Chair, I yield back and I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. LaJoy, we will submit the full text of your official statement for the hearing record. Please begin your oral summary, which I would ask you to keep to 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman Wilbur-Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm honored to appear before you today to discuss TSA's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, share highlights from fiscal 21, and provide a glimpse of the President's FY22 discretionary request. Like all of us, TSA faced tremendous challenges over the past year from the ongoing global pandemic. Air travel came to a near standstill, and our operational agility, the resilience of our workforce, and the strength of our partnerships were tested like never before. I'm incredibly proud of the way we've adapted to these unprecedented challenges and positioned our agency for the future. Even through the darkest times of the pandemic, we never wavered from our solemn commitment of protecting the nation's transportation systems and ensuring the freedom of movement of people and commerce. From the very beginning, TSA placed the highest priority on the health and safety of our employees and that of the traveling public. We moved quickly to implement protective measures at security checkpoints and screening locations across the country, thanks in part to your generous support in past fiscal years and from the CARES Act. We enforced social distancing at our checkpoints, installed plastic shielding to minimize personal contact, increased sanitization efforts, and required officers to wear face masks, gloves, eye protection, or face shields. Our workforce also took direct and meaningful action to supplement the worldwide pandemic response. We helped repatriate over 100,000 American citizens stranded across the globe and facilitated the distribution of personal protective equipment and other critical supplies, such as ventilators, around the world. Our partners also contributed greatly to our response efforts. We worked closely with industry and government colleagues on plans to mitigate the risks of COVID-19 and received great support from stakeholders as we implemented the orders requiring travelers to wear face masks across all transportation systems. As I said a moment ago, the health and safety of the TSA workforce was always top of mind. We used our personnel flexibilities to offer new leave options for employees at higher risk of severe illness from exposure to the virus, and maximized telework and flexible scheduling options whenever possible. And we were at the forefront in providing accelerated vaccine access through DHS's Operation VOW, or Vaccinate Our Workforce. While we had many successes, the fact remains that we have gone through a great national trauma and have all experienced heartbreaking losses. Thousands of TSA employees contracted COVID-19, and 16 employees and one screening contractor sadly passed away from the effects of the virus. My most sincere condolences go to their families, friends, and peers for the loss. The heartfelt letters this subcommittee sent for those who passed away were greatly appreciated by the entire TSA workforce. Before I continue, I want to take a moment to thank our workforce, our TSA officers, federal air marshals, K-9 teams, inspectors, aviation personnel, cargo personnel, and our vetting staffs, as well as our representatives and embassies around the world, and every single support personnel who stood behind them. To every single person, I am proud of their continued resilience and their professionalism. I also want to thank the subcommittee and the Congress for your support year after year, including in fiscal year 21, with generous appropriations, $144.2 million above the previous year. We are putting these funds to good use, and they are helping us advance our security priorities, including the deployment of computed tomography, or CT, and credential authentication technology, or CAT. These technologies are critical because they enhance our detection capabilities at the checkpoint and promote a touchless screening process. Because of the reduction in air travel, we were able to deploy these technologies faster than expected. I am pleased to announce we have now deployed over 300 CT systems at 142 locations. In fiscal 21, we will execute the next phase of our CT deployment in the procurement of 242 additional mid-size systems. TSA has also deployed 1,053 CAT units at 121 locations to date. We are planning to procure 1,001 additional units in fiscal 21. We believe CAT is a game-changing technology that provides a secure, more touchless, and seamless customer experience, and we are working to ensure that every federalized airport, from our largest to our smallest, will receive it soon. We are always focused on leveraging the best technologies to improve security and reduce touch points throughout the travel experience. Currently, we are evaluating biometric technologies and monitoring the evolution of digital credentials like mobile driver's licenses and digital passports and how we might accept them in the airport environment. While technology is one of the keys to our success, so too are TSA's people. I'm honored to serve with our dedicated workforce and remain committed to supporting them and investing in their success. TSA remains committed to fostering a fair and equitable workplace and promoting diversity and inclusion at all levels. We are at our best when our employees feel valued and are fully engaged to achieve our mission. This year, we have taken our investment in our workforce to another level with incentives like TSO service pay, career progression, and the Model Officer Recognition Program. These incentives are designed to both retain dedicated, skilled workers and attract talented new recruits. In addition to investing in our workforce, we're using fiscal 21 funds to recruit and hire talented transportation security officers in your home states, districts, and towns. Focused veteran recruitment and outreach will help us fill these important roles and many others. Filling these jobs is a priority as travel volume continues to climb as we continue to face a determined enemy. Before I close, I want to address the reports you may have seen about increases in firearms detected at checkpoints nationwide. Even with a substantial decrease in volume in 2020, officers detected twice as many firearms per million passengers than in 2019. And unfortunately, the vast majority of these weapons were fully loaded. We are working to address this alarming increase through training, our regulatory enforcement, and by helping educate the public in how to properly travel with a firearm and check baggage. As you know, the administration has released a preview of the discretionary request for fiscal 22. It provides $52 billion for DHS, which is approximately equal to the fiscal 21 enacted level, to continue to protect the American people. The request also further supports work in key areas like research, innovation, and transportation security technologies. I look forward to further discussions with you on fiscal 22 after the President transmits the full budget to the Congress. TSA continues to be a global leader in transportation security and continues to adapt to ever-evolving challenges. As we emerge from COVID-19 pandemic and approach the 20th anniversary of September 11th, TSA stands firm in our resolve to protect the nation's transportation systems. Chairwoman Robo-Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today and look forward to your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. LaJoy. Mr. LaJoy, daily airport passenger volume is 50% of 2019 levels, but it is also 10 times greater than it was at this time last year, and a steady increase is projected through the summer. We have heard concerns about whether TSA will have sufficient staffing due to this increased volume, as well as employee onboarding challenges as a result of a hiring freeze and the pandemic. This has raised questions about TSA's readiness to support the commercial air transportation system without modifying passenger screening protocols and compromising public safety. Does TSA have sufficient staffing as passenger volume continues to increase? And how will you ensure no modifications of procedures or threat detection capabilities will pose risk to passenger security?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. And what I want to say to the subcommittee is throughout this pandemic, never once did we sacrifice security in any of the changes we made to our procedures. That was something we established very, very early on, that no matter what, we were not going to sacrifice our security mission, and we won't as the summer volume increases. We've been faced with a number of the same challenges that many other companies face in trying to attract talent, especially in light of the pandemic. For a number of months, we were challenged to bring people into large rooms to do assessments. I am happy to report that in the last 120 days since January, we have hired approximately 2,500 officers, and we anticipate over the next 8 weeks hiring another 1,600 more. If you compare that from a staffing level to volume, we are about where we were in 2019. But again, one of the things we've also realized during this pandemic is that once we hit that high watermark with respect to volume, we don't recede much from there. And so really, we're going to be extending our hiring through the summer because, as you pointed out, we do expect volume to continue to increase even as we get out of the summer and closer into the holidays. We want to make sure that we continue to hire through the summer and into early fall, so that we are positioned for next holiday season and also in the next summer as well.
Okay. You talked a little bit about this in your opening statement about the steps that were taken to protect your workforce and the traveling public from COVID-19. How will those efforts change over the coming months as both the number of passengers and vaccination levels increase? Well, at the same time, we know not every passenger will have been vaccinated.
Well, again, Madam Chair, one of the things from the very beginning, we followed the science and we listened to our Chief Medical Officer. We put in place, the measures that were advised from the CDC and from our Chief Medical Officer are the things we put in place to help protect the workforce. So very, very early on, even before we had dedicated sort of PPE supply lines, we made it voluntary for our employees to wear surgical masks. And then once we did have dedicated supplies coming in of surgical masks, it became a requirement for TSA officers to wear surgical masks. Following soon, it became a requirement that they wear eye protection to include face shields if they weren't standing behind the plexiglass shielding that you see in so many airports today. That remains the requirement today. I'm also happy to report that as I'm sitting here, 60% of TSA employees have received their first shot, and a full 40% have been fully vaccinated. The priority the department has placed on vaccinating our workforce, it really has been a game changer from where we were several months ago. So we continue to emphasize the importance to our workforce and going and getting the vaccine. And I'm very confident that at this point, any TSA employee who desires to go get the vaccine has the ability to do so.
Okay, let me see if I can get this last question in before my time's up. As new technology and protocols are implemented to prevent the spread of COVID-19, what changes to passenger screening should travelers expect?
Well, some of these we've already announced. Passengers are going to be able to carry larger quantities of hand sanitizer through the checkpoint. That's something very early on we made the decision to do. We think it's the best thing from a public health perspective. It is in no way results in a security concern from our perspective. We also, using CAT, and CAT technology is a key piece of enabling technology because it really does promote a more touchless environment. So passengers can now take their own, mobile device, if you will, and place on top of the CAT machine. They can insert their own driver's licenses. And so they're going to have much less contact with TSA employees. And as we begin to further deploy computed tomography, as we continue to deploy CAT, passengers are absolutely going to realize a much more seamless, much more touchless travel experience as they enter our checkpoints today. They are still going to encounter TSA officers who are going to be wearing a surgical mask. They're still going to, encounter a checkpoint where there may be, various locations where they're standing behind plexiglass shielding. Our airport partners did a fantastic job at helping to promote, social distancing in the airports to the extent that we can. And so, it really is important for passengers as we get closer to summer to go to tsa.gov, check with their airline, because for the last year, many people have not been traveling. So they may in fact experience some differences in their travel experience. And just as volume is returning, we also think passenger wait times are gonna return to pre-pandemic levels. So we certainly encourage the traveling public to give themselves enough time as they go through their entire travel experience.
Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for those questions, and Mr. LaHoy for those answers. As a matter of fact, those were my first group of questions. I'm reading from a screen. Just need to have that. Last week, it was announced that TSA is extending the mask requirements for travelers across all transportation networks through Monday, September the 13th. Mr. LaJoy, can you explain the factors that went into deciding on this extension and why this date was chosen? And as a follow-up question, sir, what challenges have been encountered in the enforcement of this mandate, and what actions has TSA taken as a result, sir?
Well, thank you, sir, for the question. So from, since January in this past year, in keeping with, President Biden's executive order for the whole of government to focus on protecting the traveling public, we did mandate the requirement for surgical masks in all modes of transportation. And as we've been approaching that deadline, we work very, very closely with CDC because, the recommendation still remains that to best protect the traveling public, the use and the requirement for surgical masks continues to be that which is recommended from CDC. And so that's the decision that went into extending the mandate. Some of the challenges we've had, to date, we've had about 2,000 total incidents involving non-compliance of a mask. About 90% that's happening on board the aircraft. And I can tell you that, we've most of these that we are pursuing enforcement actions in the form of a warning order. We remind passengers, place the mask on, but where we have wanton, egregious violations of that, there have been arrests that have been made, and we have enforced civil penalties for especially egregious cases. So that continues to remain a challenge for us. We have had outstanding partnership across aviation, surface, and airport partners in helping to enforce this mandate. We work very, very closely with the FAA as well as the CDC in making sure that, as we continue, that we're keeping up with any, updated guidance from the CDC. And again, the message for the traveling public is, please adhere to the mask requirements because it can result in a civil penalty or in really egregious cases where it results in an assault on a flight crew, criminal penalties to include an arrest.
To a minimum and very well handled. I can't see my clock, Madam Chair. So how much time do I have left, ma'am?
You still have 2 minutes and 17 minutes.
Well,
5 seconds, rather.
Thank you. Mr. LaJoy, also announced last week was the extension for real ID compliance due to complications related to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the second extension on the enforcement of this requirement, first by a year from October of 2020 to October of 2021, and now by an additional 19 months until May of 2022. Can you please explain the reasoning for the further extension and the status of this program to include the potential for additional extensions, sir?
Well, sir, I think it really was an acknowledgement that, the country has been going through so much with COVID-19 that for much of this year, DMV offices were simply closed. And we really wanted to make sure the states could focus on their recovery efforts. We worked very, very closely across the industry and made recommendations to the secretary. And by extending it, we really do think that we can, first allow the states to be able to focus on reopening their DMVs, and really give the traveling public the opportunity to really go out there and get Real ID compliant driver's licenses. Presently, about 45% or so is our analysis. 45% of the traveling public has a compliant Real ID. We really need that number to be closer to 90% without, resulting in a fairly substantial operational impact to airports. And so by extending it to May of 23, we really think we're providing ample opportunity for states to recover and for travelers to get the opportunity to go and get that Real ID compliant ID card.
Thank you very much. And in closing, sir, I want to thank you and your personnel again. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I appreciate your stepping up at this time. Madam Chair, with that, I will yield back.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, also both of y'all for your leadership. Mr. LaJoy, let me first of all also join the Chairwoman and thanking you for the service that y'all do. We all fly from somewhere. I fly from Laredo, Texas, and you got a great set of men and women working there, sometimes from San Antonio, and you got another great set of folks working there. So I want to thank you, the professionalism that your folks give the traveling public. I have two quick questions. One has to do, as you know, on the border, we have what they call, Homeland calls non-essentials, which are Canadians, but in this case, let me talk about Mexicans because I'm right at the border. If you want to cross from Monterrey into Laredo through a land bridge, you're not allowed in, even though over $19 billion have been spent in the past per year by 18 million Mexicans before the pandemic. But if you're a rich Mexican, if you want to fly from Monterrey, you can fly to San Antonio or Houston. And I assume that you all you do, from what I understand, is check to see if there's a COVID test that's negative. Isn't that correct on what y'all do? If you have somebody from Mexico coming in, flying in, you just check a COVID test and they're able to walk in?
Well, I'd have to get with CBP, sir, on what the protocols are at the land crossing. I'm not as familiar with what CBP processes are as they cross a land border.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. My question is at the airport. Forget about the land ports. I was just giving you a layout of the situation. But at the airports, don't you just allow Mexicans to come in with a negative COVID test?
Well, we at TSA wouldn't be doing those checks when they arrive from Mexico. But again, I'd have to go back and see what some of the protocols are for specific countries. So I'll commit to getting back something specific on the record after I consult with CBP, sir.
Okay, thank you. The other question that I have is in the past, as you all are doing the automation, there's a lot of equipment that you upgrade. And in the past, some of that equipment we had suggested to some of your past TSA administrators is, can you use some of that surplus and maybe provide them as surplus equipment under the law to maybe local jails, local facilities, maybe other countries that might not have the equipment? The problem has been is that you have those long maintenance contracts that a lot of the surplus was not able to be used because of maintenance contracts. So therefore, you in the past, or your agency in the past, had stayed with the equipment, and we were just paying a lot of money to store that equipment and still paying on the maintenance. Could you provide us, the committee, whatever equipment you might have in surplus, what you're paying for storage, what you have for still paying on maintenance on any past generation of equipment? Because as you know, we're always trying to get the best equipment, which we support you, but I just want to see what are we doing with all that equipment that might be in surplus.
Absolutely, sir. I'll get all the information that you asked for. We'll give you a full briefing on anything we currently have in surplus. Now, again, we don't typically have much in the way of in-property type technology. Most of our equipment is fully deployed at airports. But as we continue to deploy CT, more of the advanced technology at the airport, that is going to free up, to your question, surplus equipment. We have had, very good and fulsome conversations with the State Department, because there may be a number of opportunities for us in our capacity development efforts in so many places around the world to work across the interagency for how we could, in fact, donate equipment, especially to much of the developing world. But I'll certainly get back a very fulsome briefing on what we have and what we think we may be able to develop into the future.
Yeah, that I would, I think the committee would appreciate, because anything we can donate to some of the countries, that'll be good for them, but I think it'll be good for us also. So thank you so much. And I really mean this. You have a lot of good people working for y'all. I appreciate it. We think all the members, one way or the other, we see them every week when we fly in. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. LaJoy.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. LaJoy, I just want to echo what you've heard from the other members here, particularly Mr. Cuellar just then. I tell you, I fly from Jacksonville International Airport regularly, and the men and women that you all have are doing a fantastic job, and I want to join the chairwoman in expressing our condolences to all of those members who you lost and their families. If you would let them know, we grieve with them, and so we thank them for their duty, and we thank them for their sacrifice. I want to go back to something that was a little before your time. Well, I don't know if it was before your time with TSA, but before your current position. The EDS reimbursement, the explosive detection systems that many of our airports put in right after 9/11. I can't believe we're still, this many years after 9/11, still reimbursing those agencies or those airports for those capital investments. Can you give me an idea, Mr. LaJoy, how much is being directed toward EDS reimbursement this year? And I think we're about to a point we ought to be able to just wipe that out for the remaining airports that haven't been completely reimbursed. Can you give me those numbers? Do you know them?
I can speak generally to the issue and certainly get more specific, because it does vary airport by airport depending on what the exact project is. As I think maybe you're familiar with, the Aviation Security Capital Fund is really that $250 million that really has never changed. The buying power of that isn't what it was certainly when it was initially authorized. And so a lot of the airports have really engaged in pretty substantial upgrades to their entire baggage system, right? It's very, very different than what existed nearly 20 years ago.
Right.
It really is. It depends on the nature of the project that the airport's pursuing. Big airports, small airports, everything in between. So we can get back a pretty fulsome briefing with specifically what that funding level is, airport by airport, depending on the project.
Okay, good. And you make a great point that it's now time to regenerate that equipment in many locations. I know. Let me ask this too on the Cat 2. there was, I think you said that there was some talk about utilizing this at DCA. Can you expand a little bit about how that's going to help us with no-touch processing, and what's the rollout on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, sir, and certainly would invite you and any of your colleagues over to our TSIP at Reagan National Airport, where we've got, this in prototype. We did test Cat 2 at DCA towards the end of 2020. We are deploying that. We're doing field testing at a number of locations around the country throughout the spring and fall. And really what Cat 2 is, it's the next level in credential authentication technology. It incorporates, as part of the unit, plexiglass shielding, so it anticipates the continued need to have that, shielding effect from COVID-19. It also incorporates a camera. So it's matching in real time your image to the image that's in your ID. So it really truly is the next evolution, not only in security, but in seamless touchless travel.
Yeah, and I actually had an opportunity at JIA to look at that in operation, and it was quite impressive. So congratulations on that. Also, if I could ask, are we looking at that on an international points of exit, points of departure, or are we utilizing any of that abroad?
Overseas, it's obviously been a while since we've been overseas and not been able to travel. But the use of cameras, whether it's at border control stations in the airport and or a checkpoint, is fairly commonplace. It may be a little different than what we are intending here. But generally speaking, I think the entire world has kind of realized we need to continue to promote technology that really does get at more seamless, more touchless travel, and helps facilitate, how passengers travel, whether it's international, within a country, or certainly between countries.
Okay. And Madam Chair, I see my time has run out. Thank you, Mr. LaJoy. Appreciate those answers. I yield back.
Mr. Price?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator, thank you for your testimony, for your service. We appreciate your appearing before us today. You're well acquainted, of course, we all are, with evidence that the rise of white supremacy and domestic extremism are the major terrorist threats that our country now faces. And of course, that was underscored by the attempted insurrection on January 6th, the storming of the Capitol. You're probably aware that after that event occurred, the head of the Association of Flight Attendants, Sarah Nelson, called for suspected perpetrators to be barred from flying, citing that they posed a threat to the security of those on board. I know I and others have heard anecdotal reports from colleagues about what it was like, how frightening it was to be on flights with those perpetrators in the ensuing days. Many were flying back to their districts at the same time that the insurgents were flying, and were in many cases menacing and pretty serious questions whether those people should have been on board an aircraft. So considering this, the present threat of domestic violence extremists, what is your assessment of where we are now, the adequacy of the list you're working with? Are you satisfied that we're barring from flight those who should be barred from flight? Do you have any figures about whom you are denying boarding to, and the kind of communication you're having with your intelligence counterparts to ensure safety for all who pass through your custody?
Well, sir, like you, following the attack at the Capitol, I was horrified by what I saw, and certainly was concerned, for several days and weeks with some of the, the threats that I know you and your colleagues were facing, and we really did take pretty immediate steps. Under TSAs, we work very closely with the FBI and all of our vetting authorities. And we took immediate steps to ensure that at no point was the threat of an aircraft, at no point was anybody who took place in the attack on the Capitol going to be a threat on board an aircraft. And again, we worked this very, very closely with the FBI, and I'm very confident that we have, all the authorities, the information we need to continue to ensure that we can provide for that protection of the aircraft. And again, in keeping with, what you alluded to with some of the threats against members of Congress, we immediately placed an embed over with Capitol Police because we want to know when members are traveling. We help facilitate member security both in the airport as well as on board those flights. And so we're going to keep that person in place over at the Capitol Police headquarters because it's important for us to know, when members are flying. Subsequent to the attack, we also substantially increased the number of law enforcement presence at our checkpoints. We use our federal air marshals in uniform, and we deploy them in a number of locations throughout the country to include the 3 airports, here in the National Capital Region. I'd certainly be willing to provide a more specific briefing in a different setting if there's any specific information you need on figures. I'm certainly prepared to do that in a different setting.
Well, I did hear informal reports. I expect we all did about the immediate beefed up presence at the checkpoints, and especially in the DC airports. And so I know that's true, and it probably would be good at some point to have a more formal accounting of that response. And then going forward, that's what I'm really asking you. Are you satisfied going forward that the process is in place to identify these people who are quite willing, obviously, to be violent, to do harm, quite willing? Are you satisfied the process is in place to identify such people and bar them from flying?
Well, this remains a priority for the department. And again, we work very, very closely within the department to include our intelligence officials, to include the FBI. So I am very confident that there are adequate processes in place to help protect the transportation system. Very close partnerships we've had at the highest levels of the agencies to ensure that continued partnership exists. Daily interactions within the intelligence community to make sure that we have adequate information that we need to ensure the safety of the traveling public. So I am very, very confident in those processes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Henson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. LaJoy, for appearing before us today. I've really enjoyed hearing about your testimony already. TSA worked during the pandemic, in the post-pandemic setting as well. So today, for the purpose of this hearing and my questions, I would like to focus on the latter because we are beginning our work, obviously, on the budget. And you talk about the longstanding workforce challenges at the agency. And I also wanted to follow up a little bit on the conversation you just had with our chairwoman, asking about workforce challenges for the agency as well. So I would just start by asking, how can Congress and members of this committee better support job opportunities within TSA for young people just entering the skilled workforce right now?
Well, thank you for that question, ma'am. And really, we've had tremendous support. A lot of what we focused on, we were challenged to stay competitive in a number of cities before the pandemic. The average sort of starting salary for a TSO is somewhere between $16 and $20 an hour. So our authorities allow us to extend, retention incentives, hiring incentives, and we work very closely with a number of you and your colleagues' staff to make sure that, hey, if we have opportunities to get the word out to come work for TSA, please help in that effort. We've had tremendous success going back several months now in a very robust public campaign to attract people to come work for TSA. We do pay full-time healthcare benefits or part-time employees. We offer tuition reimbursement. So it's really about, communicating all the different incentives that exist for those who come work for TSA. The support that we've gotten from this committee on some of the TSO pay incentives are key for us. Just last week, because of the support we got from the committee, we were able to give almost 32,000 TSA employees a pay raise. That's because of the funding we got as part of, TSO crew development and service pay. We have model officer program that every quarter is recognizing, with bonuses and pay raises, the very best that TSA has to offer. So these are all just really programs that we have, and we'd love to be able to, work with you and your committee and staff to make sure that we are finding opportunities to communicate that to the traveling public.
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely good to know you're focused on merit and rewarding those who are working hard and obviously trying to keep them engaged and a long-term member of the workforce with those incentives. The other question I'd like to focus on today is about human trafficking concerns. Last year, obviously, the TSA combined with Department of Homeland Security broadly prioritized combating human trafficking through the 4 Ps: prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnerships. And according to the website, TSA conducted a survey that revealed that human trafficking happens in all modes of transportation. And so I guess my question today is, with what's happening at the border right now, human trafficking into and through the United States, like for instance, up 35, Interstate 35 into Iowa, a definite growing concern for me, but people are obviously getting on planes as well. So has your agency made any plans to ramp up officer training to help deal with these concerns?
Yes, ma'am. I can tell you that, in the very first meeting I had with Secretary Mayorkas, this is something that he highlighted as one of his priorities, which is, combating human trafficking. So we do have required training for all TSA employees, and we help provide that training to our stakeholders across different modes. We've also placed TSA Law Enforcement in a number of key task force with our partners in law enforcement to include CBP and ICE, because, in a number of cases, I can certainly get you specifics, it's in the last minute request on itineraries for anybody that we thought may be engaging in human trafficking. And so having somebody from TSA on those law enforcement task force is really key to helping investigate and prosecuting those who would practice human trafficking.
Yeah, well, I would certainly appreciate some additional follow-up on that, just kind of how you're continuing to implement that and what your findings are as you're coming across these incidents of potential human trafficking. And then my last question today is just what resources do you want members of Congress to know that your people need in order to combat that human trafficking through our airports?
Well, again, look forward to being able to speak specifics, once the 22 budget has been transmitted to the Congress. Again, anything that we can do by way of training, I think it's very, very important for us. As you pointed out, there are, 2 million, and, as we continue to recover, 2.5 million people that travel through our checkpoints every day. And so our officers having the adequate training to be able to spot incidents of human trafficking, and especially in close partnership with our on-checkpoint law enforcement officers, we think is key. So your continued support for training and the support we give to the local leaders, I think is going to be important continuing forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mr. DeJoy, for your testimony today. And thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing today. I appreciate it, and I yield back.
Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, sir, for being here. I remember when the pandemic first hit and we were coming to DC, people thought we were courageous getting on planes. Well, that's nothing compared to your folks who were with thousands of people at a time. So I commend their efforts, and I really appreciate it. If you could give us a little more deep dive on the technology issues. I'm hearing about ultraviolet lights used on the bends that are part of the process. I've heard about 3D screening that's I'm hearing piloted in New York. Can you give us more information on that and its possible rollout?
Well, absolutely, sir. So to your first point, throughout this pandemic, and it has been an opportunity for us to work with a number of small businesses. We're testing and fielding, ultraviolet light that may help in checkpoint sanitization efforts. We've really, had a number of key initiatives to get to the very best ideas we think may be out there that could really help evolutionize, what is needed at checkpoint by way of checkpoint sanitization. So we do have a couple locations around the country. DCA was one of them, where we looked at a prototype for effectively, a machine that runs a bin through it with ultraviolet light to help sanitize those bins. On the 3D, that really is getting at the computed tomography. We have currently 300 CT machines that have been deployed around the country. By the end of fiscal 21, we'll purchase another 242. And really what that allows our officers to do is all in the machine, on a screen, they can rotate the image, they can effectively conduct a bag search all on a screen without the need for passengers to have to pull a lot of things on their bag. So, computed tomography, these CT machines, really is, key technology for us, not only from a security perspective. We're convinced this is the absolute best tools we can give our officers to mitigate security concerns, but also is going to be important in a post-pandemic because, fewer, bag checks, fewer items being pulled out of bags is really an effort to help promote touchless and seamless travel. That really, the 3D stuff really is the CT technology you're hearing so much about.
So, and your rollout on that is tempered by, the process of purchasing, if you have enough resources or the training. Is there anything else that could expedite that process of incorporating it?
Well, I think all those things are factors that we have to consider. Again, we've got 300, we're about 99.7% deployed on the initial 300. We anticipate by the end of this fiscal year, another 242 more CT machines being deployed in about 142 locations around the country. That's about 25%. We've got about 440 airports and 2,500 or so lanes. And so, all that's the ability of vendors to, make the machines, our ability to test them and also ramp up the training. And so we really think we made a lot of progress in both the last year and this year with the support from the committee. And so by the end of this year, 542 of those machines will have been procured, 300 of which are already deployed out there in the nation's airports.
Are you aware at all of their use at the world's busiest airport, which just happens to be in my district, O'Hare?
I am. O'Hare is one of the airports that has them. I believe we've got 7 deployed. I'll check those numbers, but yeah, I mean, they've had them for a while. I spoke specifically with the officers there. They love the technology. The passengers certainly appreciate, fewer things having to come out of bags. And so we really do think this is key technology for us.
Look, and for me, I believe the members obviously may not all be aware of all these possibilities, but as time goes on, what I want to know, and I'm sure many want to know, is if there's something else out there that not only provides additional security and or protects the traveler and the TSA personnel. We want to hear about it, and if it's a possibility of additional resources that are necessary, we at least want to know if it's an option. But I appreciate your effort in moving forward on these particular choices. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair. Acting Administrator, thanks for your testimony. And like my colleagues, I want to express my thanks to TSOs who have continued to serve as essential workers during this pandemic and during this time, and my condolences to those you've lost. If I could follow up on Mr. Quigley's question about the new technology and the touchless screening. You talked about some of the pilot programs. What can the committee be looking for in the next 2 or 3 years in a post-pandemic world as more travelers are coming back? What you talked about the touchless technology in your testimony. What's this going to look like in the next few years, and what should we prepare to see when it comes to funding those priorities?
I think it's an excellent question, sir. And, I think it's an especially appropriate question as TSA, approaches our 20th anniversary. I mean, following the attacks of September 11th, checkpoints really were not designed with security in mind. We operated according to a mandate, federalize all the airports, and really find ways to shoehorn in technology to an existing footprint. We've learned a lot in 20 years. That really is informing, I think, what you'll be seeing over the next couple of years. The passengers, we already know this, they're going to expect the screening experience to look different. They're going to expect it to be different. And we think, programs like computed tomography, programs like CAT and then CAT2 are really going to be key investments for us to put a dent in that. I mean, it really is going to be a sea change in how people travel. CAT2, it's a camera. It truly is, self sort of service, if you will. And then it's a camera that's, in real time, comparing your image to the image that's embedded in your driver's license. If you look at, mobile driver's licenses, so many of us travel today with our boarding pass on our mobile device. We really are, the department recently went out with a request for information. We want to learn, how could we explore this, to be Real ID compliant. We want to make sure that with mobile driver's licenses, from a cyber perspective, it's secure. From a safety perspective, it's safe in terms of privacy for individuals. And obviously, as it's intended, do we have as robust a process as we can to flag identity fraud? We want to make sure that the person presenting is in fact who they say they are. And so you're going to see these things, you see them in airports today, and then how do you tie all those things together? Much in the same way we do for checked baggage. The underlying infrastructure of an airport is really going to be key in all this, because we really think we're pretty close with this technology to achieve what we currently do with checked baggage. Rather than moving passengers from, full lanes to open lanes, we can simply move images. And so our officers, it's an efficient way for officers to help screen passengers. All these things are being tested currently in an airport. And so if I look forward to the next couple of years, continued priorities along CT, CAT2, and next generation CAT2, I think that enhanced AIT is going to be really important for us, which is, the on-person screening that would, obviate the need for a passenger to have to raise their hands above their heads. You're going to see much more screening at speed, I think, is what we're seeing currently in airports. I think it really is what the public's going to expect.
I appreciate that. I wanted to ask just briefly about retention and hiring. In 2019, the IG issued recommendations to help you recruit and retain TSOs, including improving exit surveys for those leaving. Can you share how that progress is coming and how the pandemic has affected your ability to implement the recommendations that the IG gave?
Well, again, thank you for the question, and we fully support the IG's recommendations. We've learned a lot, but by talking with our workforce. And so when you look at attrition over the last 4 years, when you look at attrition over the last 2 years, really, we've seen improvements. It's about 4% better during the pandemic than in 2019. If you look at the Employee Engagement Index, which is really sort of the key indicators as part of the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, we've seen almost a 12-point improvement in the last 4 years. And when we talk to the workforce, what we typically hear is the importance of pay, which is really, again, the appreciation to the subcommittee for supporting a number of our key TSO pay initiatives. Things like TSO service pay, as I said, gave 32,000 employees in the last 2 weeks a pay raise. Model officer, these are, recognizes and rewards the very best of TSA, that as they achieve advanced training, additional skills, they're going to be recognized for that training and those skills. So all those are very, very important things that we hear from our workforce, and we really do think is contributing to the positive impact that we're seeing in our BES results, and also the positive impact we're seeing in attrition.
Thanks, Mr. DeJoy. I'm over my time, Madam Chair, so I'll put a quarter in the jar and yield back.
It's now 50 cents. Ms. Underwood. Ms. Underwood? She may have had to get off. So that would end the first round. We now have time for a second. And I would like to begin, Mr. DeJoy, talking a little bit about the workforce and the fact that Administrator Pekoski has talked in the past about the relatively low compensation provided to TSOs, which he believes is not commensurate with the training, technical skill, and the responsibilities of the job, and contributes to chronic recruitment and retention challenges. Legislation to address the problem, the Rights for the TSA Workforce Act, has been reintroduced in the 117th Congress with over 150 co-sponsors. And as you know, the bill would move the TSA workforce into the Title V General Schedule for Pay and Benefits. Has TSA done, or can it do, an analysis on the costs associated with switching to the GS pay system? And does TSA believe that migrating your workforce to a GS pay system would alleviate some of the aforementioned challenges?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, this is important to Administrator Pekoski. It's important to the Secretary. The Secretary is committed to looking at this issue, and we are working very closely with the department to understand, what those implications would be and what the pricing would be. We are aware of the bill that would propose moving TSA to Title V. We are providing technical drafting assistance on that legislation. And for us, we think there's a couple of keys, irrespective of whatever the personnel system that TSA operates underneath. It needs to ensure at least what TSA employees would make compared to their colleagues in Title V. We think it needs to strengthen and promote due process rights for our workforce. It needs to strengthen and encourage collective bargaining. It needs to allow us to continue to perform our agile security mission. So we are committed to working both with Chairman Thompson on his proposal as well as the department and looking at what those costs would be. The CBO scored it several years ago at around $1.8 billion, but even the CBO can see that there's a lot of room for looking at that. It was compared and it used 2019 costs. And so I think there's acknowledgement that how the workforce was classified, would determine, what those changes in costs would be. But we are committed to working, both with Chairman Thompson as well as the department to make sure that we understand the implications and the cost to any changes in TSA's personnel system.
And I would imagine that that would also include an analysis of the cost savings that might be expected if you have improved hiring and retention associated with any kind of improvements in efficiency. That would be
it would, Madam Chair.
Okay. And are there other steps that you are considering to address screener pay? And would those solutions require legislation, or can TSA implement them administratively?
Well, I go back, Madam Chair, to the support we've gotten, from this committee, with our authorities, service pay, career progression model officer. These are all key programs we think are helping to address, TSO pay. These are important things for us. And again, I can't underscore the importance enough of, 32,000 employees in the last week getting anywhere from a 1 to a 2%, raise, depending on the length of service that they have in TSA. Career progression, it allows up to 4,500 eligible officers to get a 5% pay raise. So all this is within our existing authorities, and because of the support from the committee, we're able to continue to fund these activities. So it's also important for us that as we roll these programs out, and I think to your question, what positive impact is that having on retention and recruitment efforts?
Congress repeatedly rejected requests by the previous administration to eliminate the Visible Intermodal Prevention and Response Teams, VIPER, and the Law Enforcement Officer Reimbursement Program known as LEO. Do you know if the proposed eliminations were the result of any kind of analysis of program performance or cost benefit? And in your opinion, do these programs provide value to TSA?
Well, these are very important programs for TSA. And in the past, any it doesn't reflect any past steps we've taken with respect to funding was in no way a level of the importance we're putting on the program. It's just simply there's always going to be trade-offs in every budget. The Leo reimbursable program is key for us. Just last week, I was down in San Antonio, where because of the actions of a brave police officer who was working overtime at the airport, he prevented the shooting down there from becoming an even greater tragedy than it already was. I spoke previously about the importance of Viper, not only in aviation, but also in surface. So these really are key programs for TSA. I'm confident that that's been communicated at the department as well as the administration. That's going to be adequately reflected in future budgets. But again, these are key programs for us. I'm confident that that requirement's been listened to and heard by the department.
Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. LaJoy. This has really been an outstanding substantive hearing. I want to address unmanned aerial systems have caused and continue to cause disruptions at many of our major airports across the country. To address this emerging threat, TSA began the establishment of a counter UAS testbed for detecting, identifying, monitoring, and classifying UAS operating in the vicinity of airports. To support this effort, the subcommittee appropriated an additional $3 million to expand the program. Can you describe the status of this test bed as well as the progress of the expansion effort, sir?
Absolutely, sir. And again, it's a great question. We too are seeing a significant rise in the number of incidents involving a UAS. And here we kind of characterize it in two different ways: reporting and an incident. So we get lots of reports daily about a sighting of a UAS. And an incident is something where the pilot in command of an aircraft needs to take some sort of evasive action, right? So we're seeing an increase in both of those. And so to your point, this continues to be something that really is important for us across interagency to continue to look at. As you noted, Miami was the first test bed. And just this week, we've announced that LAX, Los Angeles International Airport, will be the second test bed. It's the $3 million that the committee gave in fiscal 21. And so it'll be Miami as the first, and LAX, we announced this week, will be the second test bed for counter UAS activities.
Thank you, sir. In fiscal 2020, TSA increased its engagement and outreach and obligated over $500 million to small businesses, the largest obligation amount in TSA's history. As we all know, small businesses have taken more than their share of challenges throughout this pandemic. Can you kindly describe TSA's efforts with small business outreach in fiscal 21 and beyond, and how your procurement strategy has changed as a result, sir?
Yes, sir. So as you noted, TSA, for the first time ever exceeded all of our goals, our 5 goals for small business, and it's $576 million that was awarded to small businesses. And I cannot underscore enough how important small businesses were to our response to COVID-19. Whether it was hand sanitizer, a variety of PPE, small businesses played a very key role in our ability in deploying plastic shielding throughout the airports. So again, can't underscore enough how important they were in helping, protect our officers and the traveling public in response to COVID-19. And we want to expand on that success, working, very closely, within, DHS, S&T. We're working very closely with a number of venture capital firms to find ways to, solicit support from small businesses. How can we put our requirements out there to small businesses? Broad agency announcements really is an opportunity for us to hear from small business. How can we help develop, their processes to meet the government's needs? We have a number of priorities where we'll buy, testing, we'll buy demonstration units that we understand, what they have to offer. So all these things we think are an effort to help grow and expand on the success we've had last year in promoting small business.
Yes, sir. Well, again, thank you, sir, for your service, for your answers to these questions today. In the interest of time, Madam Chair, because other folks want to ask questions in round two, Madam Chair, I will yield back, and I thank you.
Mr. Price.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator, I'd like to ask you to turn for a moment to TSA's responsibility for surface transportation modes. You referred to this a minute ago, and I'd like to ask you to elaborate. This, of course, includes freight and passenger rail, highway, and maritime systems. It's a contrast with the aviation system in that these surface transportation systems, especially public transit, are far more open and more easily accessible, and they're more exposed, therefore, to potential terrorist threats, including less sophisticated attacks that involve fewer numbers of people, less planning, and so forth. Also, unlike the aviation system, surface transportation system operators are themselves directly responsible for their own security, and TSA's role is one of offering assistance, advice, best practices, and so forth. You do have many initiatives that I and other subcommittee members have supported over the years to help prepare and train surface transportation employees and operators to observe and respond to threats and incidents. This includes the Viper program, as you mentioned, and collaboration with the Intercity Bus Security Grant Program. So my question, last March, TSA issued a final rule requiring certain higher risk surface transportation systems to provide TSA-approved higher security training for certain employees, which has affected railroad, public transportation systems, and over-the-road buses. Then came the pandemic. That changed, of course, many, many things. But I wonder if you can update us about where this stands now. Can you provide an update on the implementation of this new rule? And are you able to share any information with the subcommittee about how well the trainings are going and other activities that you have underway?
Well, thank you for the question, sir, and thank you for highlighting the importance of surface transportation security in what we do. As you noted, the surface training rule, like a lot of other things that TSA and the industry has done, it has really been impacted by the pandemic. We simply found that a number. We talk often about how much of an impact the pandemic has had on aviation workers. The impact has been just as severe in surface operators as well. And so they really were challenged to implement the rules. So we worked very, very closely where it was appropriate to provide enough flexibility and extensions in helping them implement the rule. I think we're still making good progress on that. I think that as we continue to come back from the pandemic, we're starting to see incremental progress against the surface training rule. Again, so I don't have any real concerns on the industry's ability to meet that requirement. It really was just impacted by the pandemic. Now, generally speaking, and you also highlighted the real differences in surface as opposed to aviation from a regulatory framework. It is more open. There is a much less rigid regulatory framework in place for surface. So we really do prioritize enhancing our cyber abilities, because we know a number of these operators focus pretty extensively on industrial control systems. So our ability to provide expert cyber assessments for the industry we think is really, really important. Their mitigation strategies, being able to, again, focus on regulatory enforcement. We have the new training rule. We certainly over the last 4 months have been focused on the mask requirements within surface operations. So continue to focus on our regulatory enforcement role. And then lastly, we want to use existing TSA platforms to get better analytics. We've learned a lot in aviation over many, many years. We want to get better analytics in surface that we can help them, better understand where there's trends, where we may be able to prioritize from our assessments that we can provide to some of these operators.
All right, thank you. That's a good overview. As we prepare this the transcript of today's hearing and look toward the budget, I think it would be helpful if you formalized this just a bit. whatever facts and figures you can provide us on the implementation of the rule, the reach of the rule, the future plans, that would be helpful, because this is not well known, and it's the first time today, for example, that it's come up. And so I think this role with respect to surface transportation, and particularly the current situation the agency is in with respect to these plans, which admittedly were modified somewhat, but are back on track, it seems you're saying. Anything you want to add with respect to that, I think the committee would appreciate.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. LaJoy, the TSA Modernization Act, which passed about 3 years ago, required TSA to deploy capabilities that allow travelers to enroll in the TSA PreCheck using mobile technologies. And it's my understanding that one of the major hurdles that we run into in accomplishing that is the gathering of applicants' fingerprints, which are necessary to run the background check, obviously. In order for TSA to deploy mobile enrollment technology, it's my understanding that TSA first needs approval from the FBI to deploy mobile biometric capturing technology that will enable travelers then to submit fingerprints to the TSA as part of their application for the PreCheck. Can you talk a little bit about the timetables that the FBI has committed to in its decision in its discussions with TSA to accomplish this ability to register for PreCheck through mobile devices and send in your fingerprints?
Yes, sir. I think it really is the ability for the FBI to be able to do it. So we are, to your point, working very, very closely on a process that would be NIST certified and give the FBI the ability electronically, mobily, if you will, to be able to capture the fingerprint. But you're right. I mean, so the TSA Mod Act did require us to expand by 2 on the number of TSA PreCheck providers. We want to make sure that, you know, it's an open, transparent, competitive process, all of which is designed to bring the price down and bring the number of TSA PreCheck travelers, bring those numbers up. So we are working very, very closely, you know, with the FBI on that process. I do think it's going to take a couple of years for us to do that, just given the inherent challenges in making sure that you have a process that's safe, secure, you know, and allows the FBI to adequately, you know, capture the fingerprint in an electronic means. We can get back a specific briefing on what we think those timelines are working with the FBI, but I do think it's going to take a number of years before we have the capability to do that.
Yeah, I bring that up because I just want to make sure that, you know, in our funding, that we're able to assist you on that, because I think that's going to be very important. And I really haven't heard any talk about what those needs are specifically. So I'd be interested to see that as the budget comes out in the future. Second thing, I want to say thank you to TSA. You know, something that happened during this pandemic that a lot of people, because it happened at the very beginning, a lot of people didn't know, or I think really appreciate the burden that was placed on TSA in helping to repatriate so many Americans who were, you know, scattered across the globe. And, you know, I know you all helped, I think something north of 100,000 Americans get back home. I can tell you, I was amazed at my district. I had no idea how many people from my district were scattered in some very remote locations around the globe. And you know, they're doing some great work, but needed to come back home when the pandemic hit. And TSA was just an amazing partner in helping my office get my people back home. So I want to say thank you for that. I know we got a lot of the accolades, but I know you guys in the State Department did a lot of the work. So thank you for that. And Madam Chair, I see my time's run out. I will yield back.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Acting Administrator, just wanted to ask you just a couple questions on something that came up in your verbal testimony. You mentioned that twice as many firearms were seized in 2020 as compared to 2019. That's the highest in the 19-year history of your agency. And you said a majority of them were loaded. Can you talk to me a little bit about why you think that is happening? And you talked about some educational opportunities, and so some of the efforts that you're undertaking to give people the correct information about their inability to carry firearms.
Well, yeah, it really is an interesting question about why we think it's happening. I mean, there's a number of, we've seen a number of things during the pandemic that cause us concern. I know that the FAA spoke very publicly about their efforts and its zero tolerance policy about the dramatic increase in assaults on, flight crews. We're certainly seeing those incidents increase. I think a lot of people have not been used to traveling. Frankly, they may not be as informed for how to properly, transport a firearm. But just for perspective, just the last week of April, we had 120 firearms we stopped at our checkpoints from getting on board an aircraft, and in one day alone, 32 of them. Right. So then again, this is a public safety concern because, as I pointed out, these are 80% of them are loaded. They're often just thrown in the bottom of a bag. The excuse we generally get most often is they simply forgot it was in there. And so, really what we've been focusing on is not only our regulatory enforcement responsibilities to make sure that, we are pursuing progressive enforcement actions against anybody who would illegally bring a firearm to a checkpoint, but also how can we help educate the traveling public how to properly declare a firearm for checked baggage? How can we, direct them to state and local jurisdiction, because different states, different cities have different, laws in place with respect to firearms. So one of the things we did, we developed a glossy. It really was a glossy that we developed, again, how to properly educate the traveling public, and our federal security directors all around the country are working very closely with our state and local partners to get this to gun clubs. We're working very closely with U.S. attorneys to make sure that in especially egregious cases, we can bring prosecutions, for some of these individuals. Now, we really, the number of repeat offenders is exceedingly low, right? So we really do think that education can go a long way towards mitigating these numbers, but it continues to be a concern. We work very, very closely with our airport partners and in this regard, and I think it's going to be a continued focus for ours from a public safety perspective.
How much discretion is used when it comes to the civil fines that could be imposed by the agency for first-time offenders?
Well, it depends on the nature, sir. So obviously, if there are aggravating factors that exist, that would tend towards the upper limit of what that civil penalty may look like, but it really all depends on, are there aggravating factors that are present? We have looked internally at what those things are, and so depending on the circumstances, that would dictate, what the potential civil penalty, may look like.
I appreciate the answers. As someone who flies incredibly often and very far distances, I appreciate the work that you folks are doing to vet these out. But also I think that, clearly it shows that there's a lot more that we can do. So appreciate your efforts. Thanks, Madam Chair. Yield back.
I don't believe there are any more questions. So with that, Mr. LaJoy, I want to thank you for your time and the Subcommittee on Homeland Security stands adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the subcommittee.